Hello all, how are you? This is a very strange way to do an introduction to economics and to all your different other subjects. You're meant to meet the teachers, find out what the teacher looks like, how they sound, whatever. And this is it's a poor imitation, really, I suppose, of what you really should have got. However, this is the new world we're in at the moment, and hopefully I'll be able to maybe inform you a bit about what economics is, maybe give an idea of who I am, and and what else do I need to tell you about? Maybe just maybe waking up your maybe your curiosity for maybe doing economics. Right, okay, so let's have a look at what economics is. Um, what do we do in economics? So first of all, I suppose we're looking at Edexcel economics. Um, We're looking at the specification for 2015, and the first exam is 2017. And my name is Mr. Connolly. So I'll send these PowerPoints out to you later so you can go off and look at the spec and go into more detail. I'll give you a very brief outline of what this course is about and maybe give you you might get an idea. You might see who I am and you might say, okay, I think I'll work with this teacher. Right, okay. So what we'll do first of all. So this is basically out of the spec. There's four themes we do. Two are micro, one and three, and two are macro. So what's microeconomics? Well, microeconomics is quite straightforward. Micro is microscopic or small economics. It's looking at the individual. It looks at you and how you buy something, or it looks at me and how I buy something. It looks at behaviors of consumers and suppliers. It will look at individual firms like Amazon, like Tesco's, how they behave on their own. Um, then we look at macros two and four, and we're looking at the overall aggregates of you and me. The macro economy looks at the big stuff. It looks at unemployment. It looks at economic growth. It looks at why we have rich countries and so on. Macroeconomics looks at what's going to happen over the next little while with what will happen after this COVID period. What's going to happen? How will the economy be? What's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen to spending? What's going to happen to the high street? What's going to happen to graduates who came out in 2020? Looking at those big questions and how is the global economy going to fit back together again? Will we have the trading flows we have at the moment between China and Britain and America and Europe and so on? How are these things going to behave? And that's macroeconomics. Um, so they're the kind of key things. You'll see here in theme one, we're going to look at markets. Markets are really interesting. They're not interesting in where people buy and sell. Markets are simply a way of allocating resources. How do we allocate? Who gets what? Um, the market's said to be very efficient. So we take the United States of America runs on a very market-based economy. It doesn't have much role for government. It has a role for government, but nowhere near as much as say some of the European countries have. So we look at the market system, and a market system is based on the concept of profit. Can I make profit? If I can make profit, I'll provide it. So it's really good at um, allocating resources to where they're most efficient. So you take Nokia and Apple as an example. So why did Apple succeed and why did Nokia fail? Well, Nokia failed because they made things that nobody particularly wanted. Now they had a whole pile of software engineers and a whole pile of people who were working for Nokia. Now when Nokia were making stuff that no one wanted, what would have happened is those software engineers would have probably moved across to Apple. Or if they weren't good at their job, they went off and they drove a bus, became a nurse or a teacher, or did something totally different because they weren't very good at it. And what you find is that our market system is very efficient. If you're not good at something, you can't make any money, can't make any money, well, you're not going to starve, so you have to find something else to do. So you'll move to what you're good at. So it's a very efficient system, the market system, and it is based on the concept of profit. So the market is brilliant, and the American system and Hong Kong are very market-based economies. Then we look at market failure. So markets are brilliant, but they don't provide certain things. So who's going to provide a street light? A street light outside the front of your house would probably cost you about 10 grand to put in. Now I know where I live. I know where my house is. Why would I spend 10 grand on a light? I might. Let's say I did spend 10 grand on a light. On the end of my road, the way my road is designed, there's a section where there's no houses. Now, who'd build a light there? Who put a light there? 10 grand to put a light there. I wouldn't. Even if there's a light at my house. I can't get someone to pay for it because you can't just walk on, somebody walking under a light and says, by the way, I put that light there, that's my light, give me 10p. They're going to tell you to get lost. You can't charge people for lights, you can't charge people for road signs. I'm just going to say, I'm gonna put a road sign here to say there's a very bendy road up ahead. No one's going to do that. It costs money to put a road sign up. So no one put it up. So we end up, unless where we have there's many areas where profit is not going to be made. And if profit's not made, it won't exist. The market is based on profit, but the market fails because certain goods can't make a profit. You can't make a profit out of street lights. You can't make a profit out of lots of things, and they won't be provided. So the market works, and the market failed. And what you find with the market system is, if you are successful, you make a lot of money. You suck all the money towards yourself, and you see this in America. So the American system has, you look at the American economy. What are the companies? Well, Apple's American, Google's American, Nike's American, Instagram's American, Facebook's American, and the list goes on and on and on and on. They make all the big brands, most of the big brands, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, are all American. Really successful economy. But what has happened in the States with this system based on profit? That people who own it make a fortune, but a lot of workers don't. So Amazon, for instance, the owner of that, Jeff Bezos, is the richest man in the world. But a lot of people who work for him are poor, really poor. And what you get is this mass inequality, and the system begins to fail. And this is a major issue we have in economics. And making the most, how do we make the most of what we have, and how do we allocate it and share it? I'll show you in the next slide. But markets are really efficient, but markets fail, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at this. Okay. Now, on the macro side of things, over here, we have we look at the big things. How do we make economies grow? How do we make economies more successful? How much money should we spend in education? How much money should we spend on roads? And how much money should we spend on all these other areas? So we look at this, and we look at the British economy, which is based on the UK. And then in theme 4, we move this into an international context where we're looking at global areas and how Britain fits into a global pattern and how we manage these sorts of things. So it's a very interesting course, I think. So that's kind of the theme. That's a very basic outline on your specification. What's the subject all about? Well, I think I've already mentioned it. Scarcity and allocation I've mentioned, I believe. I think. Well, I don't know if I've mentioned scarcity, but anyway, scarcity is in society everything is scarce. So people are scarce. If I want a teacher, there's only some set number of them. If I want a nurse, there's a set number of them. And anywhere you have a price of something, price creates means of scarcity. The air, by the way, is one of the few things that we say plenty of. And there's no price for it. You don't charge for air, but everything else is pretty much priced. You want a bag of stones to make your garden look pretty. You go down to home base and you buy a bag, or bricks to buy a bag. They'll set you back, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 quid to buy pebbles for your garden. So even stones, you might say, oh, they're all over the place. But you're going to buy a pile of them, they're expensive. So most things, so we're looking at scarce resources. Now, the thing about scarce resources is that every country has them. And what you need to do is be able to make the most of these scarce resources. So if you make them, so let's do an analogy with, say, baking a cake or whatever. If we make a small cake, we all have a small bit each. But if I can make a cake 10 times bigger, we can all have 10 times more. So the more we make, the more we can have. And the more we have, usually the better off we are. So economics is looking at this idea of scarce resources and how we can make the most of them and how we can make them go further. So how can we make more? And how can we then, well, and the second part is how we share them out, which is also very interesting. So one aspect of economics is how can we build the roads better? People can get around faster and get to work quicker, so we can make more. How can we educate people better? If we have more educated people, then of course we can make more. If I'm a more educated farmer, I can grow better crops. If I'm more educated um, engineer, we can help make more cars or make more phones. So education, and as people, if we can make better roads, as land, if we can make better machinery to make other machines, technology, if we can use these things, then our economy would be more successful. So making the most of scarce resources is really important. And the second aspect is allocation. Who gets what? Now a system, say for instance, we made a bigger cake. So we had a cake and we make it 10 times bigger. So we can all have 10 times more. But what happens if I kept 98% of it? Maybe you only a smidgen of it. But for you, but I'm having the rest. Well, that wouldn't be particularly brilliant. You might think that's not great. I think it's fantastic because I got 98% of the cake. And how we allocate things is really, really tricky. You think, some people think it's frivolous. It's not frivolous. It's really hard. Like, I often wonder about it. Like, I have children, and they often argue about who got the biggest bit of chocolate, or who got the nicest. God knows what. You always get some little arguments, and I have no preference. I'm quite, they're all the children the same. I want them all to get happy. But it is messy. Who gets what? How do we allocate things? And that is really, really hard. And a lot of the issues that we have at the moment that's going on in the United States is built to some extent around inequality and who gets what. Some people get very little, some people get a lot. That is really, really messy. It's not. It, we should share it all out. Let's share it equally. Well, that's communism. Communism isn't great either. We've seen it doesn't work in North Korea. It didn't particularly work in the Soviet Union. So how do we allocate resources? That's a really, really tricky problem. And that's one thing we've done. Right, let's move this on. Next slide. I might have changed location here. Moved downstairs. What I'm going to do now, what does it all mean? What does economics all mean? If we get it right, we'll be a happier nation, we'll be happier people, and there'll be less trouble and war and so on. You'll see in this PowerPoint here that if you get it wrong, if you don't allocate resources fairly, then what happens is you end up with civil unrest and all sorts of issues. And if you think about Adolf Hitler, he came to power based on the problems, economic problems that were happening in Germany in the interwar years. And some of the issues that we're dealing with at the moment in the United States are to do with inequality. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is, I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to ask a few simple questions, and you can have a chance to think. What I'm going to ask you to do is list, if you can, the 5 richest countries in the world. 1. List the 5 happiest countries in the world. And then list the 5 countries with the highest per head of population incomes in the world. So the 5 richest countries based on population. I'll give you a hint. The most rich is the United States, number 1, the biggest. It's not necessarily the United States is the happiest, by the way. So you can list the 5 happiest, the 5 richest, and the 5 richest based on head of population. Okay, have a go at that there, and I'll show you the answers in a second. So you have to think about the 5 richest per head of population, and the 5 happiest countries in the world. They're all kind of related to economics. Okay, have a go at that, and I'll show you them in the next slide what the answers are. Okay, so here we have them. The 5 richest countries are the United States, China, Japan, Germany, India, and the United Kingdom. United Kingdom is 6th. That was overtaken by India fairly recently. Of course, India is a richer country, but there are nearly 1.2 billion people who live in India. So, obviously, it's based on, even if they earn, say, a lot less than people in Britain, they still earn as a total more than Britain. So they're the 5 and 6 richest countries in the world. The head of population: Qatar, Luxembourg, Singapore, Ireland, and Brunei. There again, the richest countries in the world. They're small. You don't even think about them. You hear them really too much in terms of economic news. But in terms of per head of population, these people earn more than anybody else. The happiest places to live, and in many ways, I would think this is what we really should be measuring, and the key to this. key to economics is how do we make people happier? Obviously, we need food, we need more resources, and we need to make that pie as big as we can. But we need to be able to share it out, and people want to feel somewhat part of something, and be some sense of community, or some sense of belonging, I guess. And maybe that doesn't always exist in certain. Anyway, see Finland, Denmark, Switzerland, Iceland, and Norway. They're the five happiest places to live. And for reference, then the United Kingdom comes in at 13, Ireland 16, the United States 18. Okay, that's kind of that little bit of an exercise done. So, would I recommend economics? The answer is yes, I would. Um, why would I recommend economics? Well, economics, first of all, is a fascinating subject. It's a real live subject. It happens in front of you. So this COVID stuff that's happening, economists are studying this. They're looking at the data, statistics, they're looking at what's going on in it. We're looking at questions: should we tax more? Should we tax less? Which is the best place to live? Which is the happiest place to live? How would we make a happy world? That's really what we're after. Um, there's another reason why I think economics is a good subject and why I'd recommend it. So my son is going to do maths at university, and he will probably do maths and economics. And why it's a very well-paying degree. You combine, unlike say a mathematician who is very good at maths, or engineers who are very good at maths, physicists who are very good at maths. Economists have to be good at maths, but they're not probably as gifted at maths as I suppose. But they have to be able to communicate in terms of written form in a way that maybe the other disciplines don't. So they're kind of caught in that middle ground. They're both mathematically able, and they're also have to be able to write. So there's this joint skill. You have to communicate both in verbal form, written form, and you've got to be able to understand the data and the statistics that go with these things. And that makes you very employable. And when we look at the next slide, which is on pay rates for graduates from universities, you'll see that economics comes out pretty well. And I was watching something fairly recently in America on graduates in the States, and again, it's the same idea. The graduates in America tend to do quite well if they have majored in economics. We can see here that economics finished second in pay rates. And this study was carried out by the BBC and the IFS, both very credible institutions. So we can kind of half trust this data here. In addition to this, there was something carried out similarly in the United States where economics again does very well for those who major in economics. So pay is another reason why I would consider maybe doing economics. It's a very versatile degree. You have economists who work in health, they work in education, they work in every area of the world really. Also what they are is they're basically analytical. They're kind of always looking at data. Does the data make sense? And then they have to communicate this data. So economists are sought by employers. But no, do not do the subject just because it pays well or I might get you a job. Do something because you're interested in it. If you're interested in why things work, how do we make the world a better place? The world will reset after COVID. It will definitely reset and things will go back. And it will be policymakers, and the policymakers will be influenced by the economics of things. How do we use what we have? How do we use the people in the land better? How do we use the machines better? How do we use the roads and the countryside better? How do we allocate them and how do we share them out so that this place will be a happier place? Do we tax more? Do we tax less? What do we do with the key workers? How are we going to manage those? This is a really big, interesting question. I find that this whole area of key workers getting paid buttons really shameful. And if we can manage this better, where our society isn't as divided, and this will come down, economists will be at the core of this. So if you're interested in these sort of areas, then I think economics is a great subject for you. Okay. Hello, I've moved again. The reason for that is I have dinner next door, so I've been asked to shift. Right. What I'm going to talk about really is a kind of a typical lesson in economics. We're going to look at the most basic model we have, which is supply and demand. And supply and demand basically gives us a price for things. We'll look at how maybe the price of maths tutors could be determined. And we look at this idea. So we look at price on this axis here and quantity in this. The price is high and the quantities here. So low prices, low quantity, high quantity. So if the price of a maths tutor is say £100, here, that's £100, let's say. What we're going to find is demand for tutors will be low. It will be very low. Not many people can afford to spend £100 on a maths tutor, especially you have them weekly. So that's over 10 a week, you spend £1,000. So there won't be much demand for maths tutors if the price is high. And we see this simple model shows us this. The same token, if the price is low, we'll find that demand will be really high. Like if I'm getting a maths tutor for a tenner, I think, well, that's okay. A tenner is fair enough. It's not much more than going out and buying a few two coffees and a bun, and you're up to nearly a tenner. I think a maths tutor in, excellent. However, what happens is we have supply. When we look at supply, when the price is really high, say at £100 an hour, I think I'd be going out and dusting off my A-level maths books and working out how to teach a bit of calculus and integration and stuff. And I go back and I try and think, God, £100 an hour. And I would try and think I could supply my maths skills. And the supply of maths tutors would be high. But again, as we know, when the price is really high, we get low demand. And we have an excess supply of demand. And the same end of it, this happens too. When the price is really low, demand is here, but supply is really low. We get very few people with a tutor. I wouldn't tutor maths at £10 an hour. There's not a chance. So what we find is where these two intersect is we call equilibrium. And this here will tell us the price of a maths tutor, generally speaking. Where demand and supply equal, we get the price. So what we'll find is, I don't know, say a maths tutor for GCSE might be £40 an hour. And that's to do with the fact that I probably could teach GCSE maths. I couldn't teach A-level maths. So for that reason, the supply curve for maths tutors won't be here. It'll be in here somewhere. So what we find is that we'll find an equilibrium, which gives us a fair price for these things. The true price of something apart from tutors. Well, a real good example is this idea of diamonds and water. Diamonds are a frivolous extravagance, really. What are they? They're not essential. Yes, they really are a marker of maybe status more than anything else. But they're incredibly expensive. But why are they so expensive? Well, to get them out of the ground takes a lot of money. They're usually buried deep in the ground, and once they've got out of the ground as a basic raw material, it takes a lot of money to make them pretty, so that you can stick on the end of a ring or hanging from a chain. Water, however, by the same token, there's a huge supply of it. And it brings us to the question of all these sorts of things. I've been amazed over this COVID period about the key workers, the people who pick strawberries and carrots and the stuff that keeps us alive. We don't even see them, don't hear about them. But without them, we'd all die of starvation. And they get paid buttons. The same way with the people who work in the supermarkets. They get paid very, very little as well. But yet again, a city lawyer will get paid a fortune. And largely speaking, we don't see them. We live without them, but they get paid a lot. And again, we'll look at these things in terms of supply and demand. And there is a reason behind it. Now, one of the things I would like to think, and maybe I'm being a bit, I don't know, silly and moral or whatever it is about it at the moment, but I would like to think that when things go back to some degree of normal, our system will change, and the people who are designing our systems, and they are designed by economists and politicians, will maybe look at the world slightly different. I think we need to pay people who do the key work better, and we need to bring the gap between the rich and the poor a bit nearer. And if we do that, then maybe COVID will have a silver lining in it. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next slide, and I can't, key workers versus top professionals. I've forgotten what it was. Right, here we go. We're going to look at this thing here. So this is supply. And what we find is the top professionals in the city, the supply of them is actually very limited. So the supply curve will shift in here. And this is like what we'd get in a typical lesson. Supply curve will shift in. And what we say is that where demand and supply equal is up here. So if you want to work in a top law firm, or you want to work for a top bank, you usually have good A levels, first of all. That gets you into a good university. And the good university then gets you picked to go into a good company. All the time you need, say you want to go to a top university, you want to study economics, you go to Warwick, you go to LSE, you go to Cambridge. Well, you're needing 3 A's as a minimum to get in. That basically reduces supply straight off the back. It's In addition to that, then to get into these universities, they are selective. So you may have 3As, but you may not get in. So they're picking people on the best person statement. So the supply is limited. And then you need to probably end up getting a first or a high 2-1 or something from these places. So the supply is limited and the prices are high. Now, there's more to it than that. And if you do economics next year, we'll look at why labour markets and how labour markets work. And it really is an interesting area of this as why and how wages are determined. And at the same token, I could work in a supermarket. I did work in a supermarket years and years ago when I was a student. Um, and I can do it. You can do it. And I can work it. So what happens is the potential supply of workers in the key jobs are often very low. And for this reason, the supply gives us an equilibrium, which is low. Key workers based on supply and demand end up getting less. And if you're interested in labour markets, which I find fascinating, we'll do all that. You'll do it in year 13, but we'll do all that. And it is, it's okay. And finally, I'm probably bored you senseless now at this stage, but we're going to look at this. One of the things I would say to you is be curious about what you're going to do. You're going to spend 2 years doing a subject. Make sure it's for the right reasons. And you have the time now to dig in and research. Look at some of the TED Talks that's sent, or look at TED Talks on economics. Ask friends, family, ask current year 12s what they think about it. Ask me. Um, I am obviously biased. I think this is a great subject. I think I'd like students to come and study the subject. I'd like people to be much more economically aware of what's going on in the world. So ask, query, research, dig into the stuff that I've said. One of the things I will emphasize to my year 12s and year 13s who do economics is always wonder about the data. Who has put the data together, what they've left out. And I really believe that the most important bit about data is what's not in it. What you'll find is that people who publish data are doing it with their own interest in mind, and they will want to sell something. So always wonder, always query, and if you do that, and you pick economics for the right reasons, you'll do really well in the subject. So with that in mind, I hope I'll see some of you back in September. If I don't see us before then, have a great summer, and if you have any questions, please come and ask. Find out. Make sure you pick the right subject for the next 2 years. I think the subject is good. I think this is a great school. I think you've got everything going for you. So we'll see you maybe in September.